You know who we should call?
I think we should actually call a game developer.
We should call Steve.
All right.
That's what Steve does.
Yeah, we have a friend, Steve. He
develops
games for a living. We should give him a call.
We should. We'll get him on the horn for a little bit about the insights of being a game developer. That'd be kind of awesome.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I'm gonna pause us here
so
we can give him a heads up, see if he's actually even home.
Okay.
So we'll be right back. Hopefully with Steve. And we're back. And we got Steve on the line.
We do.
We found him.
We found a real game developer. Now we've cheated a little bit.
Yeah, we did.
We know Steve.
We know Steve quite well.
Steve is a personal friend of ours. We had just finished talking about gaming for about the last 40 minutes, and Steve is a buddy of ours who plays games with us. Yeah, but he
makes them,
and he's right. As it so happens to turn out, he also makes them. So, Steve, welcome. I guess
welcome back.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, guest host from the West Coast.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
So, man. So Steve, Joe, you take this away though, because this is more in your ballpark.
Yeah, people are going to listen to this episode. They'll be like, "Well, Joe talked for like 98% of this podcast."
Yeah, so I'm going to sit back and chime in here. And
there. All right. So, Steve, thanks for coming back and joining us today. I think we spent like the first 40 minutes just talking about games, and I think what we want to talk now is kind of reveal a little bit more about the game industry itself, because I mean, this stuff didn't just get, games don't materialize out of thin air. There's actual real people and real jobs and real software being written at companies large and small. So we wanted to bring you in and just kind of talk about the actual reality of what it's like building a game. So I got some questions here. So I'll kick off this first one here, and obviously feel free to expand on this stuff as you want. Steve's not going to talk about any industry trade secrets or specific, like a specific company that he works directly for, but we're going to dive into the industry a little bit. So I'll just kick it off here.
Yep, go for it.
All right. When I think about something like a career in game development, I think it makes sense to start at the beginning. So Steve, how does somebody get into game development in the first place? I think that's like one of the biggest mysteries out there for a lot of folks, is that, are there different ways to go about it? How does somebody get that first job in building games, or how the heck did they go about it? It
sounds like a dream job that's like, you can never get to.
Right. Now, how does that happen, Steve?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, how to break into the industry. And I think that's, a very common question in different forms of entertainment, right? Whether it be music, movies, games, being as big as they are. Now, I think they actually eclipse music and movies every year in terms of sales or just popularity, which is pretty impressive compared, where you think how far games have come in just the past few decades, which I'm sure you guys have expanded on a lot.
Yes,
we
absolutely.
Yeah. It was interesting growing up in the 90s, and I didn't consider game development as a viable career. Mostly that's because growing up in rural Pennsylvania, nobody did, right?
Right.
It was kind of manufacturing or farming, and nobody
pretty much,
yeah, those were the prospects. So I wasn't even introduced to the idea that you could, make a living from just making video games. But obviously, like you mentioned, Joe, people make them, people make livings making them, have for a long time. So it's kind of, go back to college. I took all the programming courses I could, because around that time I realized, well, let me rewind a little bit. I guess it was late junior high that I just started to discover programming, and the memory's fuzzy to me. I think maybe through just friends, or somehow I found out that games are built with this thing called coding, right? Programming. And so it was, I realized it was valuable to learn, this thing called a programming language, right? But I still didn't know how to start. And I had friends that were like, well, if you want to build PC games, you should learn this language. C.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So again, the idea of like learning a new language, like, oh, it's like learning a foreign language, right? But I did some research. I went to the library, looked at some books, of course, went to the bookstore and actually found books on C. And at first it just looked like a foreign language, like learning a foreign language for the first time. And I thought, wow, this is way more difficult than I expected, because I had no one to teach, and they weren't teaching it in school back then. You know, there wasn't like an elective class you could take that was just programming, right? Not until at least I got to high school.
So you're doing, to summarize though, you're doing a lot of this on your own at this point. I mean, even when you get to the college framework, it's still more of a personal interest to you at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, this is back in the 90s, so it was all just me and my own personal interest.
Yeah.
And I guess it became sort of a hobby to work on game. And a lot of developers, have a similar story. They started tinkering around and, just ended up turning developing games into their own personal hobby, because it wasn't like a formalized, it wasn't part of the formalized education or public education,
right.
At least.
So, Steve, when you started dabbling in like your own self-education with the C language or the C++, like stuff like that, is that different?
So yeah, even that was confusing at the time, because my friend had said learn C, and I went to the store, and a lot of there were books on C, but there were more books on C++.
Yeah,
and
those are the ones I remember reading. Yeah. But what I was going to...
Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry. Okay, I will go. What I was going to ask was like, so as you were learning this language, what was like, did you make like your very first program that you were like, push this button and it does this? Like
Hello World?
Yeah. Was there something like that you made that you were like super proud of, not a video game yet, but like the very first thing you ever did?
Yeah, Joe mentioned the classic Hello World. I mean, every single, I think, programming book out there, regardless of
starts
language,
on that.
Oh, does okay.
Yeah, it's literally just a text string, "Hello World!" exclamation usually, and you usually print it out to the system's console, whatever, on Windows. Be like in the command prompt. You bring it up and compile and execute your little program, and it would just print out "Hello World" to the console. Which, as a first-time developer, seeing that happen, it's like an adrenaline.
That's pretty
rush.
cool.
Oh, yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
You just made that happen.
That actually worked.
Right.
Yeah, I put in this command, and I formed it into an application, and I executed it through the command prompt or double clicked it, and it did something. And that, to me, that was like the first step. The next step, though, was okay. Now I can print stuff to the screen. How do I make graphics?
Right.
Because obviously, if I want to make games, I need to learn how to make graphics. So it was just, again, my own tinkering. I actually, the first book that I bought was Sam's Teach Yourself C++, I think in 21 days or 24 hours. I think I had the 21 days version, which was the thicker version. And in that book, it included a compiler, and it went through how to set it up and everything. But
right.
The compiler also came with a graphics library. It was like a kind of very primitive graphics library.
Oh, okay. So
Borderland graphics interface, for lack of better, that's
cool.
what it was called at the time. But I looked at that as the way to draw graphics. Now I know there's definitely other ways to draw graphics back then.
But that's what was supplied to you within that training.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you guys remember, but I was part of the class. I mean, you guys graduated, I think, a year or two before me.
I was 98.
You guys,
I was 99.
right? Yeah. So you guys, I don't think, had to do the whole senior project thing.
I just missed it, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's right. You guys just missed it. But my class of 2000, we were like the guinea pigs.
Yep.
And so being that I do a senior project, I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I did my senior project on, building games or building some kind of graphics application, since that's kind of what I want to pursue, or think I want to pursue, right? So that's what I did. I used this, this Borderland graphics interface library, and basically, what the book was teaching me to develop this little animated, graphical animation. It was really, if I remember, it was really weird and kind of goofy. I had a few blocks that were supposed to represent buildings, and this other block would fly across the screen and drop like, a missile or a bomb or whatever.
Sounds like something right out of Atari, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was inspired by. I think it was called Missile Command.
Oh yeah, I remember Missile Command. Yeah,
you remember those old arcade games?
Yep.
And I wanted to turn that into a full-fledged. The idea was I wanted to turn it into a game where you would actually click and kind of like the bomb, whatever. But I never got that far because, and that led me into the world of assembly, which is a whole other topic that we can get into another time. But kind of stay the course here and get to the actual meat of what people are probably wanting to know is how do you get into the game
so to summarize a little bit, I think what we've heard from you is it really starts with a curiosity, right? I mean, it really starts with kind of a drive or a passion to actually create or write something with whether it be a coding language or some type of modern language in terms of turning that into something. Right. I mean, that's really what I'm hearing from you is that I started myself. I wanted to learn this. So I went out and I learned how to code within these various languages. And I know just from knowing you, because we're personal friends, I know, we carried this all through, you carried that all through high school. I met you in college. And that was something I remember when I met you in college that you were very passionate about. So then I guess the question becomes is that, okay, I know we even worked with the same place for a while. And I know at that point in time, you still weren't working in games. So really what happened at that transition point in your professional career where you kind of flipped from, we had left college, you were already working a professional job, but then all of a sudden you found yourself in the game industry. How did that transition work?
Yeah. The fact that I came out of college in a lot of debt, as a lot of kids did.
Many of us did.
My first priority over making games. I mean, yes, I was very passionate about making games. I wanted to do that, but being in the geographical location we were in rural Pennsylvania, there weren't exactly game companies lined up down the street.
No, there were not. There were not.
Definitely not.
Yeah. So, but I still needed to get a job and start getting an income. And because I had graduated with an engineering degree, ultimately, we ended up working for a manufacturing company that just provided a stable income for me. It was something that was, they had paid the best of most of the employers, I think all the employers in the area. It seemed to me like a logical step is like, okay, first step is I need to get a job so I can start getting an income. And then I saw some opportunities within that company to maybe go in the direction of the more software development route. There were definitely some opportunities to develop software within that company. So, but still, it was manufacturing focused. It wasn't game focused. So it was limited. But to me, my idea was get my foot in the door somewhere, make an income, and then hopefully, work my way up to the point where I can transfer to a more software oriented position.
Were you able to do
ultimately, that? Yeah, I mean, in a way that kind of happened. I mean, honestly, my first couple jobs there were very simple. They didn't require, my full attention 8 hours a day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So having access to a computer, having access to some free tools, free compilers and whatnot, and just the knowledge I had from tinkering around for the years, I was able to actually develop some games in the, the downtime during work hours. And actually I developed, Pong basically, over the course of one summer, and it became, pretty popular among the, among the other employees.
No, that's awesome.
I was working. In fact, Joe, I think you played it. I think you might even be in the credits.
I do remember. I remember that, what you want to call it, tech demo that you wrote of Pong. And yeah, I remember playing it. It was very enjoyable for exactly what it was.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it's just Pong, right? But it was the idea behind it was for me to really get a chance, take a. And this is okay. So here's first bit of advice, right?
Right.
You want to get into games. Take something that's already. You might have this amazing idea. And you do this all the time. You might have this amazing idea, but shelve that for now, and pick something that's already been done. Something super simple, like Pong, or Breakout, or Tetris, or whatever.
Yep.
And try to build that first in your language of choice, because that's going to teach you. Not only how to use the language and develop, basic game logic, like, what is a game loop? How do you manage player input? How do you do AI? How do you manage physics? Things like that.
That's a great point there. Take something that exists, that it's a relatively, I don't want to say basic as if I'm downgrading something, but something that's a tried and proven idea that is not, it's not complex in a way that would blow your mind, but it's something that you could recreate at some level, even if it's primitive.
Exactly. And what I found out by working on, even just on Pong, because I tried to make it very, look, I don't know if it was AAA quality, but, I wanted something other than just like a black and white pixelated game. My game actually had, lighting and had particle effects and had, a complex somewhat complex AI that would move in a kind of a human way, with reaction time and it would, quote, miss sometimes, even though the AI could be programmed to be perfect. Obviously.
Right.
So I learned a lot of lessons just about, managing physics, managing some AI, and just programming in general. Things like, using recursion and classes and object management and whatnot, just from creating Pong. Also dealing with like graphics libraries, input libraries, and audio libraries and things like that. How do you bring them all in your project? How do you hook them up? How do you make calls into those libraries to get the effect of it you want? So a very simple game like Pong gave me that platform, or that simple mechanic to build up my knowledge of game development around, which was a great start for me. And also, go ahead.
I was going to say, and up to this point, this is still you doing this on your own with some time that you had at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I had no formal education on game development. It wasn't even a thing, when I was in college. In fact, software engineering wasn't even offered as a degree until I was a senior in college. So that's how far behind we were back then. But game development was completely off the radar. In fact, it was still very much the mentality of the time that, game development is not really a realistic career for anyone to pursue.
And I think that's something that we should mention here, just kind of put a little flag here and say, I think the era that, Steve and us are talking about here is that there were some trade schools and some schools where you could go to, but game development at major universities was not something you could just go and take traditionally. There might have been some schools at this time who's just started offering it, but the vast majority of schools in the countries did not treat game development in the same way that they might have treated, and I'll kind of spoil something here, software development.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And it definitely wasn't the massive industry back then either. And it was big, and it was growing by leaps and bounds even back then. But you can tell the major shift hadn't happened yet to where now,
right?
I think basically I still newsletters somehow from the college I graduated from, and in some of those I have seen articles about game development or curriculum, which I think is fantastic that even a college like that, it's again in rural Pennsylvania is now offering those courses. That's really encouraging for the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What was your next question, Joe?
No, I was just going to say, so at the point we're at, you're writing your own stuff, but then then what happens, now that you've kind of excelled at, okay, I think I can make Pong, but then what happens?
So back to this company I was looking for. I had worked there for about 5 years, and over the time, just in my free time, developed several little projects, but I still had cited this goal that I wanted to work in the game industry. And at the time, to me, that just meant eventually I was going to have to move to California, because that's
it's the seat of the game industry. Well, it's the seat of the software industry in general.
Right. Silicon Valley up north, and then you had, big game developers in Southern California, especially around like the LA, Orange County area. And I just thought, well, I'm going to have to make that move. It's a big move, but I also wanted to move to California for other reasons, back then, just because, I wanted to see mountains and the weather looked really fantastic and, et cetera, et cetera. And, but game development was my primary motivation. In fact, there was a very specific company that I wanted to work for growing up, that was out in California, and so it was always on my mind. And I thought working for this big manufacturing company that eventually I would have the opportunity to transfer out to California if I put in enough time, because the way it worked is if you worked, in an area of this company for a while, eventually you could move to another department. And I thought, well, that might be an opportunity for me, because I knew there were, these remote offices or manufacturing plants in California. And I thought, that's the next step, get there geographically, right? But as it turned out, there was a recession back in 2008.
I remember.
2009.
I remember because we were there.
Yeah, we were there, and it hit manufacturing pretty hard, especially the company we worked for.
Yep.
And so I ended up getting laid off. But being that I was laid off, I wasn't tied down in terms of family or anything like that. I just saw it as an opportunity. I said, well, if I'm ever going to make this move, now's probably the ideal time. I thought, well, I was unemployed, right? Well, fortunately, there was a pretty good severance. I mean, I did luck out in the fact that there was a pretty good severance package offered, and it was enough for me to make that move. And I actually moved in with a friend of ours from college for a while, so I wasn't paying as much rent. It certainly helped that he was able to give me a break there for the first couple months. So I lived out in California.
At this point, then you actually have moved to California. So you took the opportunity, due to this unfortunate layoff, to actually pack your bags and you moved to Southern California.
Yeah, that's exactly right. California had been, a big dream of mine to move there since I was a kid. And then on top of that, wanting to make games for a living, it just seemed like it was now or never,
Yeah. If you're going to do it, you were going to do it then.
Yeah, I was still young. I had the means. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had, a combination of employment and severance from the company. So I thought, well, this is it. This is the opportunity. But I also knew that, it's not like I landed in California and all of a sudden game developers, or like,
right. I mean, there's still a journey. There's still a journey ahead of you, right?
Yes, exactly. I knew how difficult it can be, and I started applying to game companies right away, and I didn't even hear anything, with zero experience and just showing that, my previous job experience hadn't even been in the geographic area.
Right.
I was well, and on top of that, the fact that my degree was in electrical engineering and not game focused, even putting my personal projects on my resume, I just wasn't getting any calls. And it's the age old problem, right? I don't know what they call it, the double-edged sword or whatever, right? Where it's you need experience to get into the company, but you can't get experience
until you get into the company.
Kind of right.
Yep.
Or the industry.
So someone's got to take a leap of faith on you and hire you in with a weak resume, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I thought, well, my best chance, I mean, I knew I wanted to write code. I wanted to, I was doing it in my free time, building games. I thought, well, I need to get at least some professional experience as a software engineer.
Yeah, there you go.
So I started exploring, while I was applying to game companies, I was also applying to just companies in the area that needed software engineers. And like you said, fortunately, there was a company out in San Diego that was, it's just the timing was just right. And they were gracious enough to take a chance on me as a junior engineer with no experience. But that's how I got my foot in the door. I was contacted by a recruiter. I went in and interviewed, and I told them what my goals were. I said, I'm very passionate about software development. I really want to do this as a career. I didn't mention
mention games indirectly in the interview, but you told him, hey, I like what I.
Oh, I see. We're going to train you up nice so you can leave.
So you can leave in 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of left that part out.
Yeah, good idea.
But keep in mind, I also had a passion for software development.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
My brain was just wired that way. I thought, I just can't do anything else. Well, it's not that I can't do anything else. It's that I wanted to make a living writing software, regardless. And I saw it as a big stepping stone.
Yeah.
So you would say that's how you were programmed?
Oh man.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I like it. Yeah, I love
Go
it.
ahead. I'm sorry. Keep going. Keep going. Don't mind me.
So I got in as a junior developer. I worked for that company for now. This is where I want to give out a word of caution
Sure.
to any listeners that are aspiring to be in the game industry. Is while it was a great step for me, if you choose to go that route of gaining some software engineering experience through a non-game company, that's okay, but don't stay there too long.
Okay.
I stayed there for almost 7 years.
Oh, damn.
Because now, to be fair, I really did enjoy what I did. I loved the project I was on. I was the total owner and subject matter expert of this particular project that I was on, and I loved it. I looked forward to going to work every day, and I did along the way start to question, well, do I really want to make that leap into the game industry? Because I worked with game developers. That was what was interesting about working for a software company. Is I actually worked with some former game developers, and listening to their stories, it kind of made me second guess how badly I wanted to work in the game industry because, there were the stories of the long hours, of the, big sacrifices, of sometimes the cut in pay and just the instability and whatnot. And at the time I had a pretty stable job at a project I liked working on. And I thought, okay, well,
yeah, I was
maybe
gonna say, even aside from all that, like just being somewhere for that long, you start making friends, you're kind of getting your roots, you're comfortable. It does make it probably a lot harder to want to leave.
Well, the company itself, because you were talking about, you get to know a lot of friends and people. That's true, but the company itself started to struggle. This particular software company just kind of lost its relevancy over the time that I was there. It was already starting to go when I started there, but it really, really started to lose its relevancy. As is common, in the software. I mean, technology changes, and if you're developing a product that just becomes outdated or unpopular, then you have to shift gears, right?
Well, the world, no matter what job you're in, no matter how comfortable you think you are, the world keeps changing, and so you have to make sure that you're also adapting to whatever situation is thrown at you too.
That's fantastic advice. Yes, that applies to any industry.
Yep. Yep.
And combine that with the fact that I still had this itch to work in the game industry, I just, I realized it was a good time for me to look into moving on.
Yeah. It gave you that little push you were looking for.
Right.
Yeah. It did. But again, I waited too long. I feel like, 7 years was, even though, again, I was content, if you want to be in the game industry, get some experience, but I would say 2 to 3 years tops, max, if you're going to do some non-game industry job. And then, and I'm talking right out of college. And then even during that whole time, you might as well be applying. You might as well just keep applying, because somebody eventually along the way might see that you have even 6 months experience as a junior developer, or a year experience as a junior developer, and want to bring you in. It's all about timing in the game industry. So I would say, just keep applying the entire time, even if you're working for a non-game industry company. So fast forward to where I left. I decided to leave the company. I actually moved to another. I applied for game companies, but I still, even after almost 7 years experience as a software engineer, I still wasn't getting any callbacks. I still wasn't getting any sort of hint that I was being looked at by anyone in the game industry.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm just not there yet. I need some other type of experience. So an opportunity came along for me to work and a little more in the realm of graphics programming. And I got hired on, mostly through a friend actually who had already worked with the company. So I got lucky there. All of who you know, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I got in there and I worked there for 9 months because that company, unfortunately, had some major issues with some of their products and having to cut costs quite aggressively. And I was just, being that I wasn't there very long, I was on the line of, a big list of people that were on the chopping block to go if they had to do layoffs. So I got laid off from that. But I still had, a little bit of time to gain some graphics programming experience, albeit not anything compared to what
it gave you another, I'll call it, it gave you another bump or another mark or another notch on your resume though, right? It gave you maybe something that you thought maybe the resume needed.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so when that layoff happened, that's when, at this point, I had been, I'd been in California for, 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wow, I still don't have a job in the game industry. I still haven't accomplished what I came out here to do. So that's when I told myself, I said, that's it. It's do or die. Like, I am going to use this time that I'm laid off. Unfortunately, again, I had unemployment. I had some severance. So I had some time to be aggressive. I mean, really aggressive about applying to game companies in the area. And I did, and and it was stressful because I was unemployed. And to get into a game company, you always have to take a programming test, the interviews and whatnot. And so it was stressful trying to do these tests and do the interviews and trying to put my best foot forward and trying to, lean on my experience that I'd already had as a software developer to convince prospective employers that I was going to be a good, a great employee, a good candidate, great employee. And I still I can't even count how many resumes I put out there, how many recruiters I had emailed or been in contact with.
But it sounds like at this point, it sounds like after the second job had ended, the one where you only worked for 9 months, but you did get some graphical experience. It sounds like, though, at least from what you're saying, that you were able to land some interviews and had actually gotten your foot in the door, at least in part of the process by this point.
Yeah. So at the company I was only at for 9 months, I also worked for game developers there. And they were very encouraging, and they said, "You'll get it. You'll get it."
Okay, keep applying.
They had seen, what I was capable of, and they said, "Just keep trying. It's tough."
Okay.
But they, they assured me that they said that, you'll get it, and they even told me that if I had trouble, to, talk to them, and they might be able to set me up as
sure.
well. So again, that's part of the benefit of working for a non-game company as a software developer is you might be lucky enough to meet people that know people or have been in the game industry themselves and might have some connections.
It almost sounds cliche to say, but the end networking comes up again, right? In some situations in life, talking to people who have been in the industry or can get you advice or get you somebody to talk to or some type of passage, is always helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you can make friends and show what you're capable of to someone who has some sort of connection in the game industry, that is going to be immensely helpful to you. But actually, that's not how I ended up getting in.
Which is also good advice, because I want to throw something in there. I know that sometimes the networking term can be a little bit, it could be, what's the word I'm looking for? It could be kind of nerve-wracking because, it's not always easy for people to just go out there and socialize and network and everything. So, and I think what's good is I think what you're going to get into is that's not the only way in, as you're about to tell us.
That's absolutely right. I mean, that's a tool. Keep in mind that it's a good tool to have, but it's not the only tool. It's not the only possibility for getting in. As I'll share with now. So like I said, this was a time period about 2 months. I was unemployed and I was aggressively applying, and I thought, okay, I have software experience now. I have all these great projects under my belt. I still, in the meantime, have developed a few more just projects as a hobby, not huge. We're not talking about something I published, anywhere or even put up on a site where you share games and whatnot, because actually back then I didn't know about them, but but I still take it. I still, and it was good for resume material, especially when you get in the game industry. And I was told by a hiring manager, on your resume, especially for juniors, That's what they want to see. They want to see that you have the passion, that you've developed projects on your own. Because it's one thing to be able to program. It's another thing to have the inclination to learn the technologies and the tools needed to develop games. And you learn all that through tinkering on your own time, through developing hobby projects. So fortunately, I didn't know such a thing existed as work for hire. And that's exactly what some smaller studios around Orange County is they're work for hire companies. So they're basically contractors. And the good thing about these studios is they churn out they work on a lot of projects that they don't necessarily own. You know, publishers will hire them to develop certain aspects of the game or do some porting. You know, some of them are just port houses where they take a game that's been developed for one platform and they'll just port it onto another one.
I think we should put a little asterisk here, and I think you make a great point. Getting into video games isn't just designing the next Call of Duty or the next Halo, you know, or the next No Man's Sky or something, right? Oftentimes it can be some of these, what's the word you put them, kind of these work for hire studios that actually get they pick up various projects and things from other studios, other developers, and other publishers. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, but a double asterisk.
Yeah, sure. Right.
would be that if you're a visionary, you know, if you have, I mean, absolutely don't feel like you can't put that out there, because the game industry still needs creative people, still needs people to invent new ideas. And I mean, it's tough. There's a sea of games out there that go nowhere, that don't see the light of day. Even some really brilliant games that have been created by really smart people with really ingenious ideas. You know, it's still a matter of luck. But don't let that hold you back. I mean, the game industry still very much needs those people that have an idea that they're passionate about and want to see that to fruition. I mean, look at a game like Portal 2. You know, I think at one point that was the most successful game had been the highest sales on Steam or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, massively popular game, right? That's a good example of someone who, you know, had an idea and they were very, very passionate about their idea, and they took the risk of, you know, I think I don't remember the entire story behind it, but I think they just got, you know, they did whatever necessary to get their idea in front of a major publisher.
Valve.
You know,
Valve saw their I think Valve saw their end product or saw their tech demo or whatever, and they brought them in and said, we would like you to come work for us because of, as we were saying, they had a demo or they had something that they had created.
Absolutely. And that's an example of why we still need, you know, people who are visionaries out there. So,
yeah,
but if you're like me, I'm not.
Hey, everyone's different. It's all good.
Right. I'm not exactly the creative type in terms of, you know, I didn't have this, you know, this brilliant, unique idea that I thought that had never done before,
right.
You know, never been done before, that I thought, oh man, you know, I gotta get my idea out there. And I met people like that. But that wasn't really my goals. You know, my goals were, I wanted to work on games, but I wanted to work for an established company. I didn't have, my drive didn't come from, you know, a place of wanting to develop my own idea so much as it was wanting to learn how some of the, you know, most fantastic games out there that I grew up with were developed. So that's I just want to frame that,
that's great.
You can want to get into the game industry for different reasons. You don't necessarily have to have the next groundbreaking idea to get into the game industry or to want to work in the game industry like I did.
Yeah, let me put it this way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going into the industry saying, I want to be the person who helps transform the idea or produce the idea or make the idea happen.
Not write the code, but just the ideas behind it.
Or vice versa from what you're saying, Dave.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
He's laying the tracks.
Well, right, yeah, Steve's laying the tracks.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. I would be the idea guy.
You'd be the idea guy.
Yeah, like, what if we give him a big battle axe? Like, I don't know how to write that into the game, but
that's when someone like Steve comes to you and says, That's the 6th battle axe we've added this week.
Yeah.
We're going to cut down on the battle axes.
Like, by the way, you're fired. Like, oh shit.
All right, sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
It just reminds me. I remember hearing a story about this person who had worked for a well-established AAA studio, with a very popular product, and their entire job was just making crates.
Making crates? Wow.
So they were the crate guy.
Hey, man. It pays the bills.
All right, I'd be the crate guy. Those
are probably like he probably gave out like 100 different variations of crates.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Who's to say you can't be creative?
That's
being
right.
the crate guy. You know, I mean, different types of wood, different types of stain.
Different grain patterns.
What are the dimensions?
It's
is it like
huge.
Matryoshka, where it's a crate within a crate?
Yeah.
The crate.
I
guy.
love it.
That's all right. Hey, man. Somebody's got to make.
Someone's got to be the crate guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the amazing thing about the game industry nowadays, as opposed to back in the 80s and 90s, you had, it's very common to have a team of 2 people,
right?
And they were developer, designer, artist, musician, everything. They basically had, and there's a lot of games in the 90s that were actually made by one person.
Yeah, I mean look at the stories behind Doom, or or Quake, or Duke Nukem, right? That was usually like 1 to 12 people.
Yeah. How many people? How many people work in your where you work, Steve?
I work for a smallish AAA studio that is under a pretty big publisher, but our studio alone, I think, has we've grown quite a bit. I mean, when I started. We're kind of fast forwarding a little bit here, but
that's okay. We can circle back around. It's all good.
Yeah, when I started, I think there were a grand total of maybe 25 employees, and now I believe we're up to around 60 or 70.
Okay,
jeez, it's a lot of people making games. And
we'll get to this on the second question, but that is on the small end of AAA development. Most AAA development can range as high as 300 people, or if not more. Easily.
I mean, there are major developers out there that have thousands of employees worldwide.
Yep.
All working on various products under the same
Call of Duty.
House.
It's Call of Duty.
Call of Duty. Yeah. Everyone's working on Call of Duty.
Yeah. Everyone else is working on something else. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so you ended up. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think you ended up, one of these interviews with one of these work for hire studios was actually successful, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be called up at a time when this particular work for hire studio had a lot of simultaneous projects going on. They had some new projects coming down the pipe. They needed more engineers.
Right.
And I remember going to a website. I don't remember what it's called now, but if you Google it, there is a website that lists game developers around certain areas, right? I just did all game development companies within the area, in my case, Southern California. And I just went down the list, and I kind of set my own filters. I wanted to work on, PC titles. I wasn't really interested in mobile development. So that's how I ended up, getting a resume in front of this particular work for hire company. So yes, they did contact me. We set up the interview, and the other good thing about work for hire is they move fast. They're contractors, so they need to get people on the project now. So I highly encourage, especially people that are aspiring to be junior developers, or if they were seasoned developers like me, but looking to get into the game industry, work for hire is definitely a good way to get in, because again, they need people right now. I mean, they did not mess around. I got called, I think it was like the next day or two, I drove up for the interview and we did all that. And then I think there was a little bit of a take-home test that might have been after the interview and whatnot.
Multiple choice take-home test, right?
Right.
Yeah, no. We'll get to that in a second. But so I completed all that, and then I think it was within it was less than a week's time that I had gotten an offer. I mean, it happened that
Oh,
fast,
wow. That's impressive. They work so quick and they need people so fast that it had turned around in 1 week.
Yeah, as opposed to, my typical experience with AAA companies has been, even if I do get contacted, it's maybe a week or two after I put in my, submitted my initial resume, right? And then it might be, some more time passed. There's a couple days where I might have an interview or just get sent, some link to a programming test, because a lot of big studios will use that as a filter.
Right, because a lot of the big studios, like someone like a Blizzard, right, or an Activision, they probably get thousands of resumes within a week, I'm assuming, and they need to filter people out. And you probably disappear into the crowd when you're applying at one of the large publishers or developers.
You do, yeah, absolutely, and that's why it's still worth it to apply. I mean, they do keep in mind they do have. I mean, a pretty big team of recruiters, and they do have a lot of, being the size they are, they will have a lot of positions to fill.
Right.
But yes, keep in mind that you get a very large volume, and because they get such a large volume, they can set some pretty, tough filters, in terms of the experience level they're looking for, in terms of very specific types of skill sets that they're looking for. So, it's worth submitting an application, but don't put too many, don't put too much weight on that or worry about it too much.
Don't think just because you've applied to them, you're going to get a callback. It's just an option.
Yeah, and I would say don't get discouraged if you don't hear anything for quite a while, because again, you're in a big pool of candidates, and also even if they are going to get to you, it could take a while. You might get called a month later.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Because and I've heard about that. And I think that goes for a lot of other large companies and software developers as well too, is you might hear something 2 or 3 months later. And unfortunately, sometimes by that point, you might even have another job somewhere else. Steve, I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I know you, you worked for this work for hire for company for a little while. And then maybe to summarize, what you kept doing was after you, I don't know if you took some time off from applying, but I know at some point you continued to apply, and you eventually had enough on your resume. Your experience was enough that a AAA company, and I guess for folks listening who don't know why we keep saying that, AAA in the video game world is the big development. That's
the big games you see on the shelves.
That's your Call of Duties and your Halos and your NHL 21s, right? That is your top tier, most expensive, anywhere from like $50 to $300 million a year on a product.
We're just not going to name the company he actually works for.
Right. We're not going to say who Steve works for or anything. But so Steve, to summarize, eventually you ended up placing a resume at another company, the big company, quote unquote, big company that you work at now. And they accepted that, obviously.
Yeah. So I had done various projects within the work for hire company, which was a fantastic experience, especially being able to work on different titles, different areas of different titles. Over the course I was there, and I was there for about a year and a half. But now, again, disclaimer. Word of caution, if you do go, though, I think work for hire is a fantastic way to get into the game industry if you're not fortunate enough to just happen upon the right timing of getting into a AAA right off the bat. But keep in mind that work for hire is, the game industry as a whole can be a bit unstable, in terms of turnaround, things like that. But your AAA developers are going to be more stable, than a work for hire. Work for hire, again, they're purely, contract based, project by project based, and they're, at the behest of the publisher. Sometimes, I saw situations where some products were worked on for a year and a half to 2 years, and then for whatever reason just canceled, outright. Again, budgetary reasons. Shift in
contract work has its risks, and that's not your contract. It's the company you're working for is going out and trying to secure contracts.
Right. So, I mean, if you do work for a work for hire company, it's a great way to get in. Just keep in mind that you are probably more likely to run into, a situation where they need to reduce headcount, as you talked about before, just because projects fall through or they didn't get the particular contracts that they were
Right.
hoping for, et cetera, et cetera. But still, fantastic experience, fantastic work culture. So to get to how I got to the AAA, well, fortunately, I was lucky enough to work for this work for hire for about a year and a half, and I would have stayed there, as long as they really would have had me, because it was a fantastic. I mean, I really liked the people I worked with. It was a great work environment, good culture. But ultimately, they reached a point where, some major things fell through, and they had to let people go. It's understood. It's nobody's fault. It's, nothing against anybody that's getting laid off. It's just
it's not personal. It's part of the business.
Right.
It's part of the business. So eventually I had avoided a lot of previous layoffs, but eventually I got caught up, it was just my turn.
Yep.
And right around that time though, before that had happened, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. You work for a company long enough, you can kind of sense when things are not going well.
You get a feel for the room.
Yeah, and things might take a downturn. So that had prompted me to get out and start applying again and get the interview process rolling again. And fortunately, now I had a lot of years of software development experience, right, with the previous two companies before I worked for the work for hire. I had the year and a half to work for hire. I'd shown that I'd worked on various titles, including, and this is a big one, and everybody knows what I'm about to say, a shipped title.
Yeah.
Shipped title is like the gold medal, it's the unicorn, right? It's the one, it's the one thing that every developer or aspiring developer wants to have on their resume. Well, work for hire is definitely a good way to get that, because odds are, you will work for a project or work on a project that is, say, a port or just, kind of a co-development of something that is backed by a much bigger studio and a much bigger publisher. So you have the chance to work on something for a few months that will ultimately end up landing on the shelves. And I was fortunate enough to be in that position. So anyway, I was able to put ship title on my resume.
How awesome was it? Like, cause you always see like at the end of a game or something, like,
yeah,
it shows like the list of creators and stuff.
Right.
Would you see your name like on that list? Did you make the list on the game? Yes. That's so awesome. Were you like super excited when you saw it?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time you see your name in the credits of the ship title, I mean, it's definitely a pretty fantastic thing. I took pictures of it on my phone.
That would be so cool.
Yeah, and I was like, look at this,
like I made it.
Yep, I'm on here.
This is what I always wanted to do since I was a kid, and even though it wasn't like a very popular or successful title, it was still a ship title. People bought it and played it, and in the credits, and I was very proud of that. And I'm actually I'm on 2 shipped games right now. I'm in the credits of 2 shipped titles. So I am very, very proud of that. But you're right. There's nothing compares to the feeling of seeing it for the first time.
Well, speaking of that, let me, Steve, if you don't mind, Steve, we have a few more minutes, but there's a really important question I want to ask you just about game development in general. And I think this might be kind of like the culmination of what we were getting at earlier, Dave, when we were talking about all these games, is that, okay, so we've talked about like the career aspect, right? We've talked about the passion and getting into it. We've talked about how someone might see a typical progress through the years of like different stepping stones to finally, not that the end goal has to be AAA development, but at least that in your current situation, you are in a AAA type environment now. What does, and I don't care if you want to describe, pre-pandemic or current pandemic, because I know you're kind of still doing similar work. What does a typical day for somebody who is in the middle of that the game development industry? What does it look like? Like when you wake up in the morning until you turn your computer off or whatever and you're done for the day, what does a typical day look like for somebody who literally makes games for a living?
A typical day. Wow. Well,
I know it could probably be variable. So describe something that maybe happens like 60 or 70% of the time.
yeah, I would say in general, the day starts out by grabbing what we call grabbing latest.
Okay.
So, I mean, in the software industry, we have tools that we use to submit code changes and whatnot, source control tools, basically. And typically I start out the day, unless I'm in the middle of, fixing a big bug or working on a major feature or whatever, and I just don't want to break my current state, I'll just, grab the latest source code from the repository. And we have, of course, build tools that will build basically the latest and greatest version of the game. So just like hot off the press with the latest changes, and some may be fixes, some may be, new bugs that get introduced, some things may be new features that later get removed. We're just talking about the absolute most up-to-date version of the game that everyone's working on. Unless, of course, we've branched, but that's a whole other thing.
Right.
We usually do that around release time.
We'll blow people's minds with that
patch. Yeah. So typically start out, grabbing the latest changes, getting the build going, and usually use that time to catch up on any emails or messages or whatnot, just to get an idea of, what's in store for that day or any new gameplay changes that, I might want to check out. After I get the latest build, I usually start up the game itself or whatever, various engines, out there, such as like Unreal, Unity, Game Maker, things like that. You might start up that particular tool and, then just start. I mean, like in a small studio, we basically just had our tasks assigned out to us by, the leads and whatnot.
Right.
And those tasks could vary based on your level of experience, junior developers might be tasked with,
making crates
or making crates.
Hey, you're on crate duty.
Hey, for the next 6 months, you're making crates.
You
senior
son
developers
of a
might
bitch.
Senior developers might be handed a more generalized task that might take 6 months to a year to develop, and a lot of it is just like any other software. We follow Scrum, where we run on 2-week sprints where we set up some tasks at the beginning of the sprint with the idea of completing those tasks to the best of our ability in a 2-week time frame. And we have, of course, tools to track that. And then it's just into, I guess, focusing in on
whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah, that I'm working on and testing out with my latest changes, and then going in and either adding new logic for the next step of the feature, or debugging something that might not have been working yesterday, or just broke with the latest changes that could have been introduced by someone else.
But
or in general,
can I make a note here? I think one of the big things I took away from what you said was that when it comes to developing these things, you often will take a portion of it and work on it, or somebody else in the office may work on a portion of it. It's not like you're building the entire structure, every single asset in the game. It's very, what people are working on is very specific. So I know we joked about it earlier, but there could quite literally be a crate guy, or someone who's making a character model, or someone who's developing the level or the scenery for that level, right?
Somebody making the water.
Right. And of course you have somebody above all these people who's kind of directing that vision, that the bigger picture, so to speak.
I actually have a question about that too.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to be in the game industry, if this position existed, I would want to be this guy. The guy that sits there and plays the video game and finds the bugs.
QA.
That's a position?
Yep.
Steve will tell you.
That'd be fun. That'd be me.
QA and producers, actually. Producers do that too.
Oh. Well, sounds like a higher end job than like hiring the dude off the street.
Well, and this is probably not, would not fit into the podcast as it currently sits right now, but and Steve, correct me if I am wrong, and I could be wrong about this. Much of QA is what they would consider an entry level position, unless you're a producer who's like play testing like a final build of the game.
Okay.
A lot of QA and finding bugs are generally what they'll get a lot of contract agencies to do.
I got stuck in this wall. Fix it.
Yeah, and that's what they do. They give feedback back to the developers, so like Steve, so Steve can continue to fix those bugs. But the person who like literally sits there and plays the game is part of the QA department, and they deliver broken, like this wall fell apart in front of me, or I got stuck in it. They deliver that up to Steve so he can fix it. But they are not, they're not the best paid in the industry.
I've played video games where I swear they did not have that position.
No, you were still doing it for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the quote early access.
Yeah, right. Early access.
Let's turn our consumers into the entire QA department.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually not a bad idea. Yeah, just call it early access.
It's not at all. That's why we do it.
More people, more feedback, more players.
But I mean, the industry needs everybody, right? And Steve described one way of getting into the industry, being passionate about programming, taking those first steps into software development, and then taking the first steps into like work for hire and then AAA. But there is another path could be, and I just know this just from the research that I've done. Some people get into video games by getting into the QA department first. Yeah. Right. And then they kind of graduate from the QA department into other things. So, I mean, there are, we don't have time for it here, but there are other ways, obviously, as there in any career, out there, that there are multiple ways to kind of step through that process. Steve,
absolutely. I mean, my entire
anything
story
to add
has
there?
been from the perspective of someone who wanted to be a software engineer. You know, I mean, and one thing I want to stress, it largely depends on where the game is in the development cycle. Like right now, we don't, in our current development cycle, we don't actually have like a QA, a dedicated QA like department, if you will, or a QA team, because it's kind of in that phase of the project where the vast majority of the testing is being done by level designers, engineers. I mean, basically everyone working on it is also simultaneously a tester, because there's so much churn, there's so much back and forth. Features are being swapped in and swapped out all the time. So it's hard to, depending on where the project is in the life cycle, it can be hard to put like a dedicated QA team on there, because they might create a whole list of bugs that aren't going to be relevant anyway, because all of that feature might end up getting thrown out,
totally scrapped.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
That's why I said producers are sometimes serve as I mean, producers, we couldn't live without them. They're the project managers of the game programming world, but they also spend a lot of the time doing game testing and whatnot. It's kind of a very transferable position in terms of what they're able to do besides just product management.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. I just want to mention that you're absolutely right. There are many different avenues. You don't have to be an engineer. I mean, we have a level design team. We have artists, and artists are broken further down into character artists and animators and environment artists. I mean, you can actually look at any big studio in terms of open positions, and you'll see Blizzard's a good example. You'll see the jobs broken down by category. Art, design, programming.
That's absolutely right.
Like a guy that walks in the door that has no video game experience as far as like programming, but you want to work in the industry in some aspect, what would it be?
I do have an answer for that, but I want to preface it. Disclaimer here: I'm not by no means putting down any
Sure.
position. I think every position in the game industry is valuable.
Well, so is a ditch digger.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So is this. Yeah, exactly. This isn't. It's just that when you say that, it can be borderline.
I know it can be a little condescending. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for the record, Dave used to dig ditches.
I did not.
You son of a bitch.
All right, so maybe
but ultimately that position though would be customer support.
Okay,
dude, that's a super important position.
I know, right? And then when you hear that, for you and me, you're like, what do you mean, right? Like that should be And I think that's some of the difference of how like the corporate world puts some of these positions in terms of like where it might be on the quote unquote totem pole or the ladder versus where like your and I's perspective is, what do you mean? Like customer support seems like it should be really important, but
very important.
What you and I view as really important, obviously corporate world is really important, but in terms of like what Steve's saying, like the ladder though, maybe in a different place than we think it is.
Oh yeah, I get that too. Yeah.
Right.
That's it. I'm purely talking from a ladder perspective in terms of, I'm looking at a couple of things. Ease of getting into anything, because you said anything involved in the game.
Anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you just want to get involved and you're not focused on like being an engineer or an artist or anything like that, you just want to be involved. I'll start with customer support rep. That's probably, I'm saying, the easiest avenue.
You're in the door.
You're
in there.
Of getting in the door. Yeah, you want your name in the credits.
Steve, why didn't you just? You should have applied for that position. You got yourself in the door.
I actually wanted to write code and make the game.
Yeah, I know.
Not just deal with angry customers.
Imagine dealing with thousands of angry gamers every day. Your hair.
I have utmost respect for the people that can do that, because I would absolutely just hate myself at the end of the day dealing with so many people that are so angry. I mean, I've read the forums of games that I've developed and shipped, and every single like negative post you read, just my heart breaks a little bit, especially when you might know on the back end that it's just like, oh, I know, but we just couldn't add that feature or fix that bug, but it does happen. You read it and someone points it out and it's like, oh, I know, I'm sorry.
You got to not read those.
Well, I know. And I think that's what's so important too, because I mean, all three of us have been part of that environment. I don't think we've participated in the negativity as much, but we've been part of that environment where we've seen like the comments and things that go up on Reddit or message boards.
Yeah.
And like some of these comments you read, it's just people going off on a 15-minute tangent about how much a game sucks and why isn't this in it and why doesn't it do this. And from Steve's perspective, I mean, this is a complex organism, right? That has, a million lines of code, and there's probably 100 other things they wanted to do with the game. But after 3 to 5 to 6 years of development and $150 million spent, at some point you have to say,
just gotta let it go.
You have to say, this is the end product, right? This is what's going to production. This is what's going out there, because this stuff doesn't made for free. Steve's paid money. He's paid good money to write AAA games, right? I mean, that's part of the equation.
Yeah. That's why you put patches out later.
Yeah. The internet.
Yeah.
Yes. You brought up the money thing. And one advice I would put out there too, is if you're really passionate about making video games, understand that, it is perfectly viable. You can make, I mean, some people make fantastic salaries. But I wouldn't get hung up on the money thing. You're going to be paid well enough to, for the area that you're in, that you're going to be able to live comfortably. I mean, it's going to be a good income. But, for that particular trade, engineering or art or whatever, it may not be the best possible paying position, for across different types of companies. You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying non-game industry related companies may pay more than, the game. But that's, again, supply and demand. A lot of people want to work in the game industry, so they have a big applicant pool, so that's why, they tend to not as highly, and I'm talking about, it's not even, I would say, that common anymore. I mean, I still think that the current state of the game industry is the fact, it's come to the point now where the sectors are kind of catching up with the industry as a whole,
right,
if you know what I mean.
No, I got you.
I didn't work in the game industry 20 years ago, but back then, the hours were much, much longer. People worked much harder. They sacrificed a lot more, and the pay was definitely not as good. So it's matured as an industry in terms of compensation. But I want to stress the fact that, again, don't get too hung up on the salary. If you're really passionate about making games, it is a fun job. It's a fun industry to be part of. I mean, I get paid to make and have fun. I make fun. Right. I play the game, games that I work on, and I get to constantly learn new things from really, really smart people. So it's a very stimulating, it's a very fun environment to work in if you're passionate enough about it and you want to put in the time.
Well, that's not only is that good game advice or advice for just getting into the game industry, but that's probably really good advice for anybody, right? You want to be you want to enjoy what you're doing, right? You can't always look at the paycheck, right? It's got to be something that if you're going to go to work every day, if you're going to be passionate about, make it be something that you're going to be passionate about, right?
Gen X advice podcast.
I think, right.
Life advice.
We're canceling the normal part of the podcast. Right. The bonus episodes will now just be about advice.
Yes, life advice with Gen X podcast.
No, Steve, that's great advice. And I think, on that, I think
we should probably end it on that.
Let's end it on a high note.
That was a good high note.
I know, we are really soaring now.
Yeah,
so that's kind of what I was thinking because you said a few minutes left, so I wasn't sure I got that.
No, that's perfect.
You did good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's.
All right, I think Dave's going to take us out.
Let's call this episode, man. Steve, thank you so
Steve.
much for coming on, man. Awesome having you on as always.
It was a joy as always. Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Next time.
Talk to you guys later.